You're listening to We Ain't Dying for This, a Black woman's guide to liberation, and I'm your host, Crystle Johnson. We are a community of Black women demanding our collective liberation through radically soft living. Each week, we share the stories of Black women who have set themselves free from the expectations of others and are living on their own terms.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of We Ain't Dying for This, a Black woman's guide to liberation. I am your host, Crystle Johnson, and so excited to have this conversation with our guest, Stephanie Johnson Paul, today. Before we get started and jump into the conversation, and for you all to get to know Stephanie, who she is and what she does, would love for everyone who's listening in to let us know where you're listening in from. And obviously, as always, please share this live with a Black woman that you think might benefit from this conversation. And if you're new here, We Ain't Dying for This was created because Black women are frankly dying, and we're dying from carrying the weight of the world on our shoulders. And this podcast was really created for everyone to see themselves in how they could be experiencing liberation in their own ways. I know that we often think about liberation as a black and white sort of thing where you're either liberated or you're not. But my hope is by featuring so many brilliant Black women on this show that you're able to see how liberation might come to life for you, because liberation can look however it is that you want it to look. And today, as I mentioned before, we're going to be talking about setting boundaries and with yourself. And although we've talked about boundaries in the past, we've talked about boundaries and setting them with others. Hey, Missy. Missy is listening in from Sandy Springs. We have Courtney, Dr. Courtney, listening in from upstate New York. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Please keep it coming. Keep that engagement coming so we'll know where it is you're listening in from, as well as share the live with a Black woman that you think might benefit from this conversation about boundaries with yourself. So let's go ahead and jump in. So Stephanie, tell us who you are and what it is that you do.
Thank you for the opportunity, Crystle. I'm excited to be here. I'm Stephanie Johnson Paul. As she said, I use she, her pronouns. I'm in Dallas, Texas, and I do a lot of things. I'm like, what's the best way to describe what I do? What feels relevant for this audience is really talking about my work with leaders to figure out how they can balance their lives by putting themselves at the center and coming home to themselves. We talk so much about boundaries and really how people can do more by doing less. So I work with a lot of type A recovering people pleasers, recovering perfectionists, people who are high achievers who could do a lot less and still be Crystle raised her hand, right? Could still do a lot, but do more by doing less. And so how do we preserve ourselves, center ourselves, ground ourselves, as well as save ourselves, which is why I'm here. I'm excited to have this conversation and talk about how we put ourselves at the forefront, because we put everybody before us, we sacrifice ourselves, we do all these things. And I help people see the importance of putting yourself first so that if you want to, you can help other people. It's not a prerequisite, but if you want to, you can.
I love that. So there's two things that you said. I'm going with the last thing that you said first is if you want to help other people, then you can. Because I feel like we have been conditioned to feel required
Yep.
to help other people. But even if we do want to help other people, we do have to make sure that we're good, that we're full in order to do that, because we can't do anything for anyone else if we are running on E. And someone, I don't know where I saw this today, but it was like, you running on poverty. I don't know where I saw this, but I thought it was so profound because literally you have a poverty of energy and you are trying to help another person. How sis?
It's actually a disservice. And that's how I help people see that. One, a lot of us serve community, but for some reason, our definition of community does not include us. We are community. So if you're serving community and you're leaving yourself behind, you're not serving community. So let's start there. We don't need any martyrs. And second is that thing you said, if you want to, a lot of wellness boundaries folks talk about resting so you can do. I'm
Mm.
talking about resting for the sake of resting, boundaries for the sake of boundaries, taking care of yourself for the sake of taking care of yourself, because it's actually not your duty, job, requirement to take care of anybody else but yourself. Some of us want to share from the overflow of our cup. We don't have to. And
Yeah.
so I really encourage people to be looking at where it is that they feel obligated. Whose expectations are? Is that you? Is that society? Is that your mama? Is that your partner? Whose is that? And let go of what's not yours. It's not ours to carry.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we are not here to heal others and to take care of others. But you also said something else that someone else said to me a while ago, but it was not in the way that you said it. So when you said I teach them how to come home to themselves. What does that mean?
Yeah. So a lot of you'll meet a lot of coaches, a lot of consultants that'll help you be somebody else, right? How do I become a fearless leader? I want to be like so and so. And so they'll teach you skills, characteristics, personality. These are things that people put on. I help people remember who it is they truly are and come back to themselves. I believe that we are not broken. I believe that we are conditioned. I believe we got some habits, we got some trauma, big T and little t trauma,
Yeah.
and we have all the stuff that we need. And so coming back to ourselves and being who we truly and authentically are is the move. That's where our power is. That's where our gifts and our magic lies. We don't have to become somebody else. We have all the stuff. I got two little kids. I look at them every day like they're fearless. They love their bodies. They want to connect with everybody. They're curious. Like we are born ready to be in this world fully ourselves. And over time, because of experiences and how people treat us and institutions, that chips away at our self-esteem and our self-expression. And so we learn ways of like hiding parts of ourselves or pretending over here and like scooting over here. And my work is to really help us get back squarely in the center of ourselves. So when I say come home to, I literally mean like be more of who you are rather than be less or hide parts of yourself.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, we often are pressured to do those things because of a lot of the external things that are happening around us. And I think it's important for us to recognize that those external things won't stop happening. So, for example, when I think about being in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space for the last 10 plus years, and all these things are happening around the world, and you're saying to yourself, I got to do something, and you feel like you need to be the person to solve the problem. And if you don't solve the problem, then somehow you have not done enough. Somehow you have given up on people. Somehow you have sold out. And these are things that we hear from other people. And then we just repeat those messages
Mhm,
for
mhm.
ourselves as well. So I think it's really important, like as we have this conversation, that people become clear about there are things that are happening, but they're not going to stop happening. Whether it's in your family, in your friend group, in the world, in your community, in your city, what have you, those things aren't going to stop happening. And while we learn a lot about setting boundaries with other people, we also need to set boundaries with ourselves as well. So, can you ground us in understanding what boundaries are and what we're going to be talking about today? What do you mean when we say boundaries with yourself?
Yeah. Yeah, I just echo what you just a lot of what you just said, which is these systems don't stop. Like, I don't think we realize how powerful the systems are. We are powerful too, especially when we get in community. But I think sometimes we think that individually we're going to take on the whole thing. It's not possible. The systems are huge. They've existed for a long ass time. They work while we're sleeping. They work unconsciously in other humans.
Yes.
So again, I want to be clear. It's not that we're not putting blame on the system because those systems, white supremacy, anti-blackness, misogynoir, homophobia, like all the ableism, all these things are working. They need to be dismantled. Period. Full stop.
Absolutely.
And because of those systems and institutions in these workplaces and these relationships and our families and our friends, the way that systems are working is not going to be like black woman, black person, black femme. You know, I'm gonna give you a break today. No, they're gonna keep going. They're gonna keep asking more of you. Give me more. I will literally suck the life out of you. You said Black women are literally dying. We are giving our last, and then people are moving on, right? There was some I can't there was this was a couple weeks ago, I think. There was a person who was found at their job. They were found
Yes.
at their desk dead like 4 days later.
Yes.
I don't even know the racial identity of this person. But when I say like these systems don't give a fuck about you, this is what we mean. This person worked for this company, is dead at their desk for 4 days, was found after 4 days. Like they don't care about you. And then they kept moving, right? They probably replaced her the next day.
Yep.
So if the systems are not going to stop, which again, they should be dismantled. I'm not saying they shouldn't. We have to do something different. We can't be like, system, please stop oppressing us. It's not going to stop. That's the function of it. The function of the system is to oppress us. We actually have to take some responsibility to say, here's where I have some agency and choice. In
Mhm.
this realm, I need to show up differently. If the requests are not going to stop of me, then I need to start saying no, right? So here's where boundaries with self comes in. When the external pieces won't stop, what's the internal pieces that come up that incentivize us to keep going when we know we shouldn't? Why do we say yes when we really want to say no? Why, when our cup is empty, do we still keep showing up and trying to put stuff out there and then we're tired and resentful and people don't even give a fuck about it? Like
Yeah.
we know this. We know the script. We know the cycle. We know what happens. So we have to look at ourselves, not because we're solely to blame, and I'm not victim blaming. I'm just looking at the ways that we might be able to show up differently where we have some control. And again, there are consequences for those decisions. We can talk about that. But
Mhm.
boundaries with ourselves is we set them first with ourselves so that we can set them with others, knowing
Yeah.
that we can't control other people's reactions or their behaviors, but we can control ourselves.
Yes, we can absolutely control ourselves. So when we think about the external pressures and how we continue to beat up on ourselves, I'm gonna say it because I do that to myself as well, where I'm like, man, I should have done this, or I needed to do this other thing. And it's like, no, girl, no, you needed to do this. You did the right thing, or there's something different that you need to do. In what ways do you see us harming ourselves, continuing to harm ourselves? And what does that look like? So when you think about boundaries with yourself when it comes to work, or boundaries with yourself when it comes to your sisters, or boundaries with yourself when it comes to your family, how are we continuing to harm ourselves by not setting the boundaries with ourselves?
Yeah, and I realized I didn't even answer part of your question. I'm just going. I'm just preaching. I'm just preaching, just like a little bit, like a little bit. So how that happens, how we harm ourselves is going past our boundaries. I like to use. There's a couple boundaries definitions that I like. One is from Prentice Hemphill, who's an activist and a writer and has a podcast, all these things. I love them and their writing. And they say something like boundaries is the distance where I can love you and myself simultaneously. Right.
Mm,
So boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. So there's a distance piece where I'm centering and loving myself. And by doing that, it's also an act of love for you.
yeah.
One of my favorite therapists, Dr. Ayanna Abrams, says that boundaries are where I end and you begin. So again, these definitions take into account there's something for me to do. There's like me and my body and my wants, desires, needs, and then yours. And this is how we separate them. I like to think of boundaries as limits. And so we harm ourselves when we go past our limits. Folks
Mhm.
that I work with, either they don't know their limits. So we work on how do you actually know your limits, or they know their limits and they go past them. So it's usually one of two things. You have no clue what your capacity is. You always go past. You always take on more, say yes even when you want to say no, and then later you're exhausted, burnt out, tired, and you don't even know why.
And resent.
Or and resentful and pissed off and having a pity party and looking stank and mad at everybody breathing. Okay, but you should be mad at yourself also. And then, like I said, the other part is when people do know their limits and then they go past them. And so we also work on how do you stay within your limits? And if you do go past, how do you have grace and compassion so you don't beat yourself up? Because this is not a perfectionist journey. Again, I work with a lot of people pleasers, a lot of perfectionists, a lot of type A high achiever folks who are trying to get it right and do everything and do the checklist and be a perfect oldest daughter and be a we could talk about all the archetypes, be a giver and a solver, all those things. But how do you be who you are, know your limits, and actually listen to yourself? Value yourself enough to listen to yourself so that you don't go past them.
Yeah, we didn't talk about this, but you the expert. So me going off the rails is probably fine. As you were talking, all I could think about was guilt and how guilty I feel when I let someone down, even though they haven't told me that I let them down, but I assume that I'm letting them down and that if I don't do the thing that I said I was going to do, how upset they're going to be, how disappointed they're going to be. And the example that I'll use is last month, before I went on vacation, I was supposed to do an episode on that Thursday before I left, and I went to Spain. So it was a long journey, and I still said, hey, I want to do this episode, take two, on loving accountability with my friend Brittany Janae Kess. And I'm like, all right, y'all, we can come back. We're going to do it. Because when we were in Colombia on retreat, people could barely hear us because we were outside, like the water was running in the pools. It was just loud. So I said, okay, we're going to come back and we're going to run it back. And everybody was really excited about it. And they really wanted us to have that conversation. I did too. But during the day, what I realized is, girl, you're not packed yet. You're not packed yet. You tired. You had a long day at work. There are so many reasons why yourself within you right now is saying, girl, you don't have that hour to give. You don't. But I went
Mhm.
back and forth with myself so many times to say, well, I'm going to disappoint people, or maybe people are going to say that I'm inconsistent because I didn't show up for this recording or I canceled it. And finally, I just said, you know what? I had a conversation with Brittany, and we both were having like a day. And she was like, girl, thank you for reaching out to me and offering to reschedule for a different time. And then I also, when I posted online to say, hey, y'all, I'm listening to my own advice and my body and saying, I'm not going to show up in this space today because I need to take care of me and take care of a lot of the other things that I have going on around me. And people were very accepting of
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
And in my mind, I came up with all these things about what they're going to say and how they're going to feel. And it was just all guilt. Like I literally guilt tripped my own self. So, what would you say? What part would you say guilt plays in us going beyond our boundaries or ignoring and not having no idea what our boundaries are?
Mhm. Yeah, that's what you shared is a classic example. And it also is an example of why speaking up and speaking out and being in community is really, really helpful for this. So I believe two things were at play. It's usually guilt and shame. So
Mhm.
guilt is like, I did something bad. And guilt can be a good motivator. Like feeling guilty doesn't have to be horrible, but that shame is like I am something because of what I did. So I'm scared people will think I'm inconsistent, I'm a flake, I let people down, people not gonna like that kind of stuff is shame. And I don't think shame is very useful, especially when we want to shift and change habits and heal. And I see this all the time, people making up these scenarios, they're doomsday scenarios. They are spiraling that we do, the spiraling thinking, like it's gonna be this, it's gonna be bad, it's gonna be this. We think of the worst and never of the best. And so part of it is ego, right? Like we are occupying a space in people's mind that we might not actually occupy. Like sometimes people are not thinking about us, like just
Not
straight up. Like they do, they not. And sometimes even if they are, we have to learn that it's okay to let people down. And I think that's one thing that we work on. What would it mean for you to disappoint someone? What does it mean about you? What does it mean about them? Disappointing people is okay. Healthy individuals can deal with disappointment. It happens. It happens to kids, it happens to adults, it happens in relationships. We let people down and we move on.
Yes.
And so I try to help people work with what are the implications of the guilt? Is it that you're going to lose the relationship? What do you feel guilty about? And
Mhm.
what does it mean? What's the meaning that you're making of this guilt and usually of the shame? If it means you're a bad person, if it means you're flaky, if it means you're a bad friend, whatever it is, then we work on the spiral, we work on the shame, and we look at how do we use that guilt to redirect us in alignment with our values. I learned that from Jamila Reddy. They talk about like what's the use of that guilt? Like why would I use my time, energy, resources to feel guilty? Let me redirect that in the direction of my values. Yeah,
Mhm.
I mean, I don't want to be a bad friend because I feel like I'm a good friend and I value friendships. Let me make sure I'm shoring up my friendships in this area so that I know that I'm a good friend. Saying no in this instance is not going to make me a bad friend. And I just know that this is an indicator that friendships are important to me. Showing
Yeah.
up consistently online is important to me. So how might we affirm ourselves through the guilt, right? In the direction of our values, even if it's making us feel bad, we could actually redirect it and reframe it to affirm something about us.
I love that so much, because that's definitely something that I will leverage, and I'm sure the folks who are listening will leverage as well. Also, I know Jamila. I went on
Yeah,
her retreat with her last year in Costa Rica. So,
nice. I'm a
yeah,
huge fan. Huge
yeah,
fan.
same, same, same.
Yeah.
We normally don't do this, but I think this might be helpful to those who are listening. There's a question in the chat from Regina Smith. And she says, many of us struggle with feeling safe to be our authentic selves. How do you create environments where people feel empowered to be themselves, take risks, and innovate without fear of judgment or failure? And because you work really closely with organizations on this type of thing, I think it might be a good question for you to answer.
Yeah, that's a great question. I usually start with some kind of agreements, some kind of, I call them community care guidelines. I got that from Natasha Harrison. I do a retreat twice a year that's centering race and gender. I don't do DEI either. I do justice work. I do liberation work. I don't do DEI. I don't want to do no DEI work. But when we talk about how do we create safer spaces, how do we create brave spaces where people can take risks and all these things, we have to look at what's the container that we're building with these folks. So how do I be with people who I might not know or as things are brand new to me? Like how do I do that? I would have to have some kind of agreements or community care guidelines that we would lean on to hold myself and other people accountable. So that's how I do that with organizations. That's usually where we start.
Yes, that is really important and a great place to start because before anyone starts interacting, you already know what type of space this is. And if you don't abide by the guidelines, then hey,
We got another guest also. But we
hi,
do need the guidelines. We need the guidelines. This is one of my littles.
hey, little,
This is Bloom. You want to say hi?
hi.
Now he's starstruck.
Okay.
But yeah, yes, we need the guidelines. We need the guidelines and we need to develop a relationship to the guidelines. It's
Yes,
not just making them, it's not just putting them on a wall or in a bookmark or starting the meeting with them. We actually have to live into them. And that's hard. Living into them is really tough sometimes. And it's like we're learning how to human together. We're in a relationship. We mess it up. We're not perfect and we come back together and figure it out.
yeah, for sure. And one other thing that I would also add is that if you are an organization, so I think that was a good example for like individuals as you are interacting with each other and organizations as a whole. But I think that organizations also have to be able to hold people accountable when they don't abide by those community care guidelines. Because if you continue to allow people to show up in a way that is not aligned with your values, they're gonna keep doing it. And ultimately they're harming all of the people around them because you're allowing them to continue to show up in that space is no longer brave, it's no longer inclusive, it's no longer one of those spaces where people feel comfortable making a mistake and taking a risk.
Right. Yeah, and I encourage people to get real about their commitment. Like we know it might be something on the website, it might be something in the handbook, but are we really living into this? And when the going gets hard or when it's time for accountability, what happens? I work with a lot of groups who are also trying to find ways to not necessarily punish each other. So how do we not replicate how the systems handle us? So without punishment, but with consequences, with loving, fierce accountability and consequences. How do we create a community where they want to take accountability? It feels like something to do because we're building trust in the community. And if people are consistently violating those things and harming each other, we really have to get real about our commitments. Like, are we really about what we say we're about? And if we're not, let's be honest about where we are on our journey instead of pretending we're somewhere that we're not. Organizations do that when they're hiring people. Here's what we've done and here's where we are on our journey. Be real about where y'all are. People might still want to work there. And some people just want to show up for a check. Don't talk to me about this, that, and the other. They've
Right.
set their boundaries. And so let them do that. But don't lie, don't pretend. Let people know where you really are. So that when you open, I see a lot of people open it. We're having a listening circle. We're having a this, that, we're having a community forum. We're having a if the guidelines are not in place and you're not really about your commitment, don't even start it. Don't even start it. Just don't.
Yeah, 1,000%. 1,000%. Because when you are honest with people and you let them know what it is, and I know that's hard sometimes, as like someone who's recruiting, for example, you have a
Oh
role
yeah.
that you close, but don't say things that aren't true because
It's
then you
it's
have people depending on whatever it is that you've shared.
and the thing is they're gonna find out. Like you can't it's hard to fake that funk. And if
Mhm.
candidates are smart, they'll ask certain questions that you're not gonna be able to answer well. So whether it's in the questions or whether it's when they work there, like people showing up to workspaces and feeling really duped. You said you cared about this. You set aside this resource, this fund, this time. You resource people in a particular way, but when it comes down to it, when it's too hard, or it may be risky, or there might be a compliance issue, or maybe there's a lawsuit and maybe we can't say certain words, or there's
Yeah,
a ban, then you've fallen off and I didn't think we were doing that here. I didn't think I signed up for that.
yeah. And when we do sign up for things like that, situations, and this could be an organization, it could be a friendship, it could be a relationship where you've signed up for something and then you're like, wait a minute, this is not what I signed up for at all. And we sometimes feel like we don't have a choice, like we don't have agency because maybe we've spent too much time there. Maybe we have fallen in love. Maybe
Mm,
we feel guilty about walking away too soon. I know that for me personally, when my wife and I separated from each other, and the first thing that I said, and this is wild, like, thinking back, I'm like, people don't get to get divorced. And I was like, I don't love this at all. Like, I don't want to tell anybody about it. I feel a lot of shame around giving this information and sharing together. I feel guilty because maybe there's more that I could have done. And I just felt like
mm,
I didn't have any power.
mm, mm,
How can we, when we are in situations like that, where we feel like we don't have no choices, we don't
mhm,
have an option, how do we step into our own power?
mhm. Yeah, this is powerful. So one, thank you for sharing about your example. You had all the examples tonight. Because I again, to me, this feels like knowing both the power that you hold, but also being in community where you can be reflected and people can remind you who you are.
Yeah,
And I see this happen so many times that we feel we either isolate ourselves or we are isolated, so we do feel alone. We feel like we're the only one going through things. And so part of what I encourage people do when they feel that way is one, get reconnected. Reconnect one to yourself. How do you reconnect to who you are, what you like, what you love, your desires, your needs, your wants, so that you have a baseline for what to expect. Because we've taken on other people's expectations and standards, sometimes how we're measuring is off, right? So when you said like people don't get married to get divorced, I mean like who is people? And who said that and what who said that and what standard and who's what? That's not even yours. It didn't fit your situation. So how do we recalibrate and come back to ourselves? That's the theme. Come home, come back home. What do I care about? What's most important to me? What's going to make me happy in this situation? If that is a separation, that's the direction I need to move in. And what society says, or my mama, or my friend, or my homegirl, or whoever is actually not most important here. What I feel, think, desire is. So first, I ask people like, how do you reconnect to self? And then how do you reconnect to sources, resources that will help ground and center you? So it might be, for some people, it's spirituality. For
Mhm.
some people, it's the more than human world or nature. For some people, it is a group text. It's like, hey, hold on. I need some reminders about who I am in this world. Like I need to be reflected. Or y'all know I made this commitment. I said I was gonna do this, and now I don't really know. Like, can somebody remind me of where I was when I initially made this commitment? So
Yeah.
asking people to reconnect, to reground, center themselves, and find something that reflects them helps us step fully into our power and choice. And you'll be surprised, like when we feel lonely and isolated, it feels like there's only two choices. We get in this binary, either this or that, right? And if I do this, that means a win, and if I do that, that means a fail. Well, like when marriages aren't working, divorce might actually be the best option. Like actually that's winning. Divorce might actually be winning. So if it's traditionally or externally a fail, but it's a win for you, you choose the win. You choose the win, right? And then we more options might open up. So it's not A or B, win or lose. It's how do I grow? How do I heal? What do I learn from this? There are way more options than we think are out there, and we can open them up, step into them, move into them, create new things for ourselves within the confines of our situation. Of course, there are limits and boundaries. It's
Yeah.
not limitless, but we often have more choice and more control than we think. And we need to be on the lookout for those areas where we have that control. And we do that again by reconnecting to self and to others.
Yeah, I know I'm not alone when I say that the first thing that I do when I'm experiencing some difficulty is shut down and isolate, because that's what
Yeah.
we do. We try to
Yep.
come to our own
Yep.
mind. And then I am so thankful for my community of people who are like, girl, you seem different. What's going
What's going on?
on? What's real?
Oh,
Real? Seriously. Like, I know
yeah.
you. You tell me what's going on.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful for that, because otherwise I would literally just be in my whole head by myself trying to figure it out.
Making up scenarios, spiraling, like making up and again, we're laughing and it's real and it hurts and it's tiring and it's draining, but there is some relief. There's some relief. And again, if we can sort out what's ours and what's other people's, what systems, I think we could go a long way. We're sometimes taking too much responsibility, and sometimes we're taking too little, and we have to recalibrate that. We got to get that balance right.
You said sometimes we take too little, because we talked about before, sometimes you the problem.
It's me. It's me. It's me. It's
How do
me.
you identify when you're the problem?
Yeah. I mean, one huge way you can identify that is if everybody else is always the issue, but you have not looked at yourself, then you're the problem. Look at who started the thing. What's at the root of it? So for me, for example, and I shared this with Crystal before. I When we initially connected to do, we had a vibe check. I completely forgot about it,
Mhm.
and I create my own schedule. So when I look at my Google Calendar and I see back to back to backs, and I'm irritated, like why these people got to do this, and I hear this story, this narrative about what other people need to do and why they so rude and why they not considerate and how could they. I need to slow my roll because I'm talking about they, but I'm not talking about the person who said yes to all these invitations.
Yes.
And that is a mate. And so look at who you're talking about. Look at the root. Look at who started the thing, who made the decision, because most often if your narrative is about they or the people or the or systems or the workplace, sure, yes, it's them, but there's a piece that you're not looking at. What is your part in this, and how can you take ownership, stewardship of that part, and shift what you can? And again, there might be consequences. I want to be clear, like, sometimes we don't want to take that responsibility because it would mean doing something that might not feel good. It would mean disappointing someone or letting someone down or what we perceive to be that thing. We might lose a relationship. Usually we won't, but we might, and we don't want to do that. That doesn't mean it's not an option. That means we just don't want to do it.
Yeah.
So we have to be honest with ourselves about what's our part in this, and then decide, like, what is worth it to me. I need to do that calculation. What is the risk worth taking? Is it worth my peace of mind? Is it worth my time? Do I just have to deal with this? Do I have to deal with, I was thinking about this in preparation. We're going in the holiday season. A lot of us about to be with family that we haven't seen or go to family dinners or holiday functions where people going to say and do all kinds of things. Is keeping the peace worth it to you? Is it worth it? Now, for some people, it might be. For some people, they might be tired of it. I, my weight is not up for discussion this year at dinner at
Oh,
Thanksgiving. I actually don't want to talk about my partner or my lack of partner and who's here and who's not and why.
yeah.
These are boundaries that we set with self, and you'll know because it's about your behavior rather than what other people are going to do or not do. So the boundaries with self is about what you will do or not do, not telling other people what to do or not to do. And that
Mhm.
is the big key.
That is such a great clarifying point. And I know I've been coming with the examples today, but I got another one. So I am, as I've shared with people before, I'm adopted, but I am my biological mother. And my relationship with her is very strained. One of the reasons why it is strained is because my weight becomes a topic of conversation every time she sees me. Like, I think the last time I saw her, she hadn't seen me in 2 years. And the very first thing that she said to me was like, "You getting big? Look at your butt. Look at this. What's all this?" And I'm just like, in the moment, and I am a non-confrontational person. So I really like nervous laughed, and just kind of like brushed it off. But the decision that I made that last time that I saw her is that I am not putting myself in a position where she has the opportunity to talk to me about my weight or what it is that I look like or what have you. I'm not even going to give her the opportunity to do that. Does it not feel good? Absolutely. It doesn't feel the best because while we don't have a great relationship, she's still my mother. So, me taking myself out of the equation to say, "Hey, I'm not going to do this." When we communicate with each other, it can be by phone. We can talk on the phone. I will text you, send you an email, a carrier pigeon, but I will not I will not be in your presence for you to talk down to me and make me feel bad about myself, because in doing that, I'm self-sabotaging me and the things that I need and the things that I'm willing to, or I say that I'm willing to accept.
That's an unfortunate and a really common example. I hear that all the time. I've heard it in my family too. And I've had to explain, like, this topic is not up for discussion.
Mhm.
I don't want to hear comments about my body. Whether you think it's helpful or not, that's actually none of your business, right? So it's about asking people to mind their business and you minding yours, and you live with the consequences. For you, the lack of connection, even though it's sad, It's worth your peace of mind. It's worth the thing that you have to give up. For some people, it's not worth it for them. And they'll continue to be in those situations. I don't want to knock one way or the other. I don't want to disparage what we do in response to like some of the violence that we receive. That
Yeah.
nervous laughter makes sense to me because you have to also be in a safe or safer place to do some of the things you need to do. Which is why you get on the phone. On the phone, there's arm's length, and I can mute you, and I can put the phone in the bathroom and walk in the other room. It's harder in person, and my physical safety might be up at play. So I will never disparage how people respond, but I will encourage people to think about what are the consequences that you're willing to live with. For some
Mm-hmm.
of us, we have to violate some of these long held traditional rules in our family of who can say and who can't say stuff. Because
Yeah.
elders can't just be talking. We can't, they got to be held accountable too.
Yes.
Right.
But
Or you can't, right. Or you can't say nothing to your black mama. Like, well,
mm-hmm.
we got to, there's some accountability conversations that we got to have if you want to. And
If
there's a lot of people who go no contact, who aren't speaking, who are on limited speaking terms, because that's just what it is. That's where we are. We're keeping our peace front and center, and it's worth it to us.
Yeah, absolutely. Our friend is upset with us. He wants you to himself, and that's
He
okay.
said, he said, what made you think you should get on this? What made you think you should get on here?
So what I want to do to wrap us up, because I'm gonna give her back, friend. I'm gonna give her back. You can have her back. Oh, so cute. If you could leave the folks who are listening with one final piece of advice about setting boundaries with themselves, that maybe it's like a question that you need to ask yourself, or maybe you feel uncomfortable inside and then that triggers you to do something, what would you say, like, is something that could help them right now, before we wrap up?
I was like, there's so many things that came to mind. I think I'll stick with um this. You said the question, like, if this happens, then what to do? And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like um when you feel that discomfort, that guilt coming on, the shame coming on, that like pit in the bottom of your stomach, I
Yeah.
feel it sometimes. I'll use this scheduling example. When I start to go back and forth with people on, should we meet on Wednesday, Thursday, no, Saturday, no, so then I'm like, ugh, like when you start to get the
Yeah.
there's a particular story or narrative that might come to mind or to your body, and I want you to challenge it. So you get uncomfortable, you feel the ick, you feel that pit in the bottom of your stomach, and there's meaning that you're making of that. That you're too much, that it's too hard, you'll just give in. I want you to pause, slow down, and choose something else. Reframe, challenge, get in community, affirm yourself, choose a mantra, something to choose a different pathway rather than to go down that spiral. Because that's how we get got. I'll just have to do this. I'll just put this on my calendar. Or I'm tired of going back and forth. It's too much. So then we go into this story and we do all this stuff. Tr- Pause, slow down, choose a different way. You have a choice. There are consequences to that choice, but you can choose something different. We always have options. We always got options. My good friend Bealika Mikhail says that we got options. We always got options.
We do always have options. And I know sometimes they are so hard to see because you have already come into your mind with what it is that you need to do or whatever needs to happen. You're already married to it already. So you can't even visualize what your other options are. So I love the advice to just pause, breathe, take a moment, and realize that you do have other options and other ways that you can go.
We got
Absolutely.
options.
We got options.
We got options. I was trying to, the chat is bumping.
It
There's so
is.
much in here.
Let
Oh my goodness. Okay.
me see. Any questions in here that stand out for you? Because he got quiet once I told him I was giving you back.
He got taken away.
Oh,
He got he had taken away. It is moving right along. Thank you for your contributions. I didn't see any other. Oh, someone asked, is your mother fatphobic? Um,
Hard to answer because she's not skinny. So maybe
okay,
that's
it's
why.
internalized. It's
Hey,
internalized.
yeah, definitely internalized for sure. I just feel like, what is anybody's weight, any of anybody's business? Like, this doesn't have anything to do with my mom, but I see like comments on the internet all the time where I'm just like, why did you wake up and choose violence today?
Because they feel entitled to Black women's bodies and how we look and how we present, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah,
For
it
sure.
pains me.
I think the last thing I mean, or one of the last things I'll say, and I see it in the comments, and you brought it up. I've named it 15 times about community. Please get into community. And I think this is part of the we ain't dying for this.
Yeah,
Meaning we isolate ourselves or we are isolated. Get into community. Get into a community. Find you a community online, in person, at the store, at your job, wherever. Find you a community. Your group chat. You need a space. You need a space to be yourself. You need reminders of who you are. You need support, help. We ask. There's so many people, even like I said, who show up in community and help everybody else and don't help themselves. Get you a community that will hold you accountable. And
yes.
like you said, you don't seem well. Are you okay? You're doing a lot. I'm in community where when I start taking on too much, they said, Stephanie, you can do that too. You doing 18 things. Should you do 22? You can, but you should not. So why?
Mhm.
And so, and again, when someone asked about safe space, these are spaces that we create. We create spaces in our group texts. We create spaces that we create racial affinity spaces, and we
Yeah,
have some kind of agreements or guidelines about how we're going to be with each other, so that if I step out of line, somebody gonna come get me. But it
yes.
also means that when I need to take a step back, someone's gonna step forward too. That's what community does for us. And these folks, y'all all smart. You got graduate degrees, and you're doing all this stuff in institutions. The institutions usually isolate you. These positions are isolating, and they say you do it and you do it all by yourself. If you need to create a community outside of your institution so that you can vent, or you can say, am I tripping today? Did everybody see this and not nobody? You need people. And I feel like leaders, this is the horizontal connection is something
Mhm.
that we need to work better at. It's one of the first things I work with people when we get together. I ask them, who's on your team? Who are your horizontal peers? Not
Yeah,
the folks you mentoring, not your, like people who literally hold the same position or are you can look to the right and to the left and they understand where you're coming from. Who are those people for you and how can you depend on them even more than you think you are now? People are literally waiting to help. How can you step into that support?
they really are. One other thing that I'll mention here is that having community when you're in positions and you feel like isolated will also help you, your community will also help you to understand that you have an identity outside of that. Because we
Yes.
often
Yes.
get so caught up in, oh, I have this job and I'm doing all these different things and it gives us status and et cetera, et cetera. But then we fail to realize that this is not who I am, it is what I do. And we need
Mhm.
to oftentimes remind us of that, especially when we don't feel valued and when we don't feel celebrated, we don't feel welcome at the places that we're at. We feel like we failed, we've done something wrong. We need
Yeah.
our community to then step in and say, no, girl, you are amazing. You are
Right.
fantastic. You are brilliant.
Right.
Definitely need our community to do those types of things for us.
And it helps, like you said, I think that was brilliant. You said we are it's our identity. It's what we do. It's not who we are. And a lot of us are doing work that's adjacent. Like our lives depend on it, but it's not us, right? So if
Mhm.
you are doing DEI work or you're somebody connected with the ERGs, like the work that I do as a Black woman, my life depends on it, but it's not all of who I am.
Yes.
And so we have to be clear about the boundaries between that too, because when we make our life our work, then that's another set of problems. So there's no one right way that you need to be an entrepreneur or you need to work in corporate America. You need to do nonprofit or you need to do this. These narratives come up all the time. So that's why we work on our limits and our wants, desires, needs. We reconnect to those because those are the things that give us worth. Tony Jones has a song, it's called Worth Ethic, not work
Yes.
ethic. Yeah, worth ethic. And I feel like that's really important that a lot of us are doing so that we can be recognized and seen. But just existing, we are worthy and deserving of all these things that I'm talking about. That's me working on my worth, not working and being productive so that I can be seen as whatever,
Yes.
professional or good or whatever. So a lot, it's a lot of identity work, a lot of identity work. Yeah.
Yes. And I'll just elevate what Missy said. We all need soft places to land. Whenever she says that, I'm always like, man, that's amazing. Put that on the shirt. I don't know, Missy, if you came up with that or if you attribute it to someone else, but I love it. Every time you type it, I'm like, man, it needs to be on a hat, on a shirt, on something, a notebook,
Do it. Do it. Do it. I love
anything,
it.
anything. And then the last thing I'll say about community is there are two communities that I will elevate in this conversation right now. So Dr. Haley Haywood is in the chat, and she actually hosts a community gathering space for women of color once per month. Her community gathering space is actually happening next Thursday on Zoom. So if you're curious about, if you're a woman of color and you are curious about how to get plugged in, go follow Dr. Haley Haywood, and I am sure she has a link on her page where you're able to sign up for that call. The second person that I'll call out is Lisa Hurley. Lisa Hurley has a community called The Great Exhale that is for Black women. So everything that Stephanie was saying about like being celebrated, people calling you out when you need to, like telling you things that you need to hear, even though you might not want to hear it, just love in general, you will get from that community. So I've heard. There are lots of people who are talking about the Great Exhale community who are a part of it, and a lot of Black women who are really receiving a lot of benefit from that community. So follow Lisa Hurley as well and get plugged into the Great Exhale if you are a Black woman who is in search of community. And then lastly, I will say if you're not following Stephanie yet, go follow her. Go follow her.
I'm on LinkedIn a little bit. I'm on Instagram a little bit. Come play on Patreon. That's my jam. Patreon.com/TNWID. That's the name. If you want to if you want to archive, you go to my podcast. I had a podcast called Take Nothing When I Die. And that the Patreon is connected to that TNWID. So that's all archive, but I'll be on Patreon because I can't deal with my boundaries with the algorithms. I have boundaries because it's too much. It's just too much.
Yeah, we definitely need to have a conversation because my boundary is I'm only on LinkedIn. Like I found you
So
on Instagram
smart.
actually. So I'm like, I'm swiping on Instagram or scrolling on Instagram, and I come across a video that you did about boundaries. And I was like, yes, all of this. I need to have her on We Ain't Dying for This. And it took a while for us to get plugged in together. That was my fault. But we
That's
finally
all good.
did, and you're here. And
I'm
I'm
here.
happy. Yes.
This
But
was fun.
seen on the internet. So I'm like, I'll stay
It's
on
too
LinkedIn.
much. It's too much. It's too much for me. It's too much. But Patreon has been fun, and that was one of my Patreon videos. So I'll do uploads. There's a long archive. I took a big break, and I'll be back on there. But there's stuff that I don't release on any social media. I've got interviews and frameworks and updates, and also writing a book. So join me on Patreon. It'll be a fun time.
Okay. I'm excited about joining you on Patreon because I didn't know about this. And now I know. I didn't know about the book either. And now I know.
Oh, that's another conversation. Yes, it's another conversation.
Okay. Well, I
It's
have been,
about being a living ancestor. Yeah,
would
we
you
can
say?
talk about it later. It's about being a living ancestor. We can talk about it later. We'll get there.
Okay. I love it. I love it. Well, I just want to say thank you so much for being here, for sharing all of your knowledge around setting boundaries. And you gave knowledge about setting boundaries with yourself, but then also setting boundaries with others as well. And I hope that folks left with a lot of great information and things that they can implement right now. And just to remind anybody, if you missed it, her last action for you was to pause. Like when things are happening and you feel that pit in your stomach and you feel the ick, pause and really assess why it is that you're feeling that way and choose something different because you got options.
There you go. You got options.
You got options. So I also just want to say thank you to everyone else who joined the live. There was an announcement earlier this week that We Ain't Dying for This actually has a new home on the Living Corporate Network. So all of the recordings, like this episode will show up on the Living Corporate Network pod page on Wednesday of next week. So every Wednesday after a live episode, you can go over to the Living Corporate Network and actually view our episodes. What you will also find over there is a lot of other podcasts from Black and Brown folks. And you will also find a lot of resources as well that you can leverage. So I'm really excited to actually be part of the Living Corporate Network now because I know that that space is going to be celebratory of the work that we do as well as value the work that we do. So if you're not already over there, go head over to the Living Corporate Network to check out some of the content they have. But until next time, see y'all next week. Bye.
Bye, and thank you so much.